The dust swirled across the parched Tucson Street as Eliza O'Malley shouldered her father's rifle, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun cast long shadows over the Arizona territory. The year was 1885, and her father's ranch lay in ruins, burned to the ground by the same cattle baron who'd put a bullet in his chest 3 days prior. The funeral had been brief. There wasn't time for lengthy goodbyes in a land where survival demanded constant vigilance. "Miss O'Malley, you can't possibly think to run that ranch by yourself," Sheriff Perkins said, watching her load supplies into her wagon. His mustache twitched with concern, though she noted the doubt in his eyes. "Perhaps your uncle in Denver." "I haven't got an uncle in Denver," Eliza cut him off, securing a barrel of flour with a length of rope. "I haven't got anyone but myself, and that'll have to be enough." At 22, Eliza had lived her entire life under the scorching Arizona sun. Her mother had died of fever when she was 12, leaving her and her father to work the struggling cattle ranch 10 miles outside Tucson. For 10 years, she had risen before dawn to brand cattle, mend fences, and break horses alongside her father. Her hands were calloused, her skin bronzed, and beneath her practical cotton dress, her muscles were toned from years of hard labor. "A woman can't run a ranch alone," Marshall Thornton called from the boardwalk, where he lounged with several other men. "It's not natural. You'll be back in town begging for help inside a week." Eliza ignored the laughter that followed. She'd heard it all her life that she was too stubborn, too headstrong, that no man would want a woman who could rope a steer faster than most cowboys. She didn't much care. Her father had taught her that worth wasn't measured by what others thought of you, but by what you thought of yourself. As she finished loading her supplies, she became aware of a stranger watching her from across the street. He stood tall beside his chestnut stallion, dusty from the trail but carrying himself with quiet confidence. Unlike the others, he wasn't laughing. His eyes sharp and clear as mountain water followed her movements with something that looked like respect. She climbed onto the wagon seat, gathered the reins, and flicked them against the backs of her 2 draft horses. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking in protest. "That land belongs to someone who can work it properly," called George Whitman, the cattle baron's son. "A woman's place is in the kitchen, not the saddle." Eliza stiffened but kept her eyes forward. Her father's murderer had a son who was just as venomous as his father and twice as entitled. The senior Whitman had wanted their land for years, offering insulting sums that her father had repeatedly refused. Now, with her father dead, they assumed she would fold. They were wrong. As she guided her wagon down the dusty main street, she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. She tensed, her right hand moving toward the rifle at her side. "Mind if I ride alongside you a spell?" The stranger from across the street had caught up to her wagon. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30, with eyes the color of cornflowers and sun-streaked brown hair that curled from beneath his hat. A faded bandana was knotted around his neck, and his duster bore the marks of many trails. "I mind if you're looking for trouble," she replied cautiously. The corner of his mouth lifted. "Madam, trouble's the last thing I'm looking for. Name's Owen Armstrong. Just rode in from Texas." Eliza studied him carefully. He didn't have the look of Whitman's men. There was something straightforward in his gaze that she rarely saw in hired guns. "Eliza O'Malley," she finally offered, "and I don't need an escort. Never suggested you did." He tipped his hat. "But 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, especially with the kind of talk I just heard back there." She hesitated. Trust didn't come easily, not in a land where a handshake could turn into a gunshot without warning. But there was something about Owen Armstrong that didn't set off her usual alarms. "Suit yourself, Mr. Armstrong, but I warn you I'm handy with this rifle, and I don't miss." He nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. "Wouldn't expect anything less." They traveled in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon wheels and the steady rhythm of hooves against the hard-packed dirt. The landscape stretched out around them rugged and unforgiving, dotted with saguaro cacti standing like sentinels against the vast blue sky. "I heard about your father," Owen said finally. "Good man, by all accounts." Eliza's grip tightened on the reins. "The best. Did you know him?" "No, madam. But I make it my business to listen when I come to a new town. Heard he stood his ground against Whitman. That takes courage." "It got him killed," she said flatly. Owen was quiet for a moment. "Dying for what you believe in isn't the worst way to go." She glanced at him. "Did you come to Tucson just to share your wisdom, Mr. Armstrong?" he chuckled, a warm sound that seemed out of place in the harsh landscape. "I came looking for work, actually. I've been riding herd since I was 16. Thought I might find something steady here." "You've picked a poor time. Whitman's squeezing out the smaller ranchers. He's got the bank in his pocket and half the territory officials, too. Sounds like the kind of man who needs taking down a peg." Eliza shot him a warning look. "That kind of talk gets people killed." "So does saying nothing," Owen replied, his expression serious now. "My pa used to say that evil prospers when good folk do nothing." "Your pa sounds like mine," Eliza sighed. "Fat lot of good it did him." They fell silent again as the road began to climb, winding its way through rocky foothills. In the distance, the remains of the O'Malley ranch came into view, the blackened skeleton of the main house stark against the landscape, the barn partially collapsed, the corral fences broken in places. Only the bunkhouse appeared untouched, its weathered boards a testament to the fire's capricious path. Eliza felt Owen's eyes on her as she took in the devastation. She kept her face carefully neutral, refusing to let him see how the sight pierced her heart like a physical blow. "They did a thorough job," he observed quietly. "Yes," she guided the wagon toward the bunkhouse. "But they missed some things." "Oh," she jumped down from the wagon, landing lightly on her feet. "The cattle are scattered, not stolen. The well's still good. And they didn't find the money my father kept hidden." She began to unhitch the horses. "I can rebuild." Owen dismounted and began helping her with the team. His movements were efficient, practiced. "It's a big job for one person." "I've been doing a man's work since I was 13, Mr. Armstrong. I'm stronger than I look." "I don't doubt it." His voice was matter-of-fact, lacking the condescension she was accustomed to hearing. "But even the strongest need sleep sometimes." She paused, considering him. "Are you offering to help?" "I'm offering to work, for fair wages when you can pay them." Eliza narrowed her eyes. "Why? You don't know me." "I know enough." Owen finished with the harness and straightened. "I know you're facing impossible odds. I know Whitman's men will be back. And I know that what's happening here isn't right. That's not much reason to risk your life," he shrugged. "I've risked it for less." Eliza walked to the bunkhouse, pushed open the door, and peered inside. It was dusty but intact, 4 simple bunks, a small stove, a table and chairs. It would do until she could rebuild the main house. "You can sleep here," she decided. "First light comes early on a ranch." Owen nodded. "Yes, madam, and don't call me madam, makes me feel ancient." A smile tugged at his lips. "What should I call you then?" "Eliza will do fine." She turned back to the wagon. "Help me unload these supplies, and then we need to round up as many cattle as we can before dark." "Yes, Ma," he caught himself. "Eliza." The sun was beginning its descent when they finally returned to the bunkhouse, having managed to round up nearly 40 head of cattle. It was a fraction of her father's herd, but it was a start. They'd repaired enough of the corral to keep them contained for the night. and Eliza had checked the well to ensure the water was still clean. Owen built a fire in the small stove, while Eliza prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. The physical labor had been a balm to her grief, giving her something tangible to focus on besides the aching emptiness her father's death had left. "You ride well," Owen commented as they ate by lantern light. "Better than most men I've seen." "My father didn't have sons," she replied. "He taught me everything he knew." "Lucky for you." She looked up, expecting to see mockery in his eyes, but found only genuine appreciation. "Most people think it made me unmarriageable. Most people are fools." Owen took a sip of coffee. "A wise man values capability over convention." Eliza felt warmth creep into her cheeks and quickly attributed it to the stove's heat. "Well, you'll find precious few wise men in these parts." "I don't doubt it." He set his plate aside. "We should talk about Whitman. He'll send men once he realizes you're not leaving." The moment of unexpected camaraderie vanished as reality reasserted itself. "I know. We need to find the rest of the herd first. That's our priority. And then we rebuild the fences, repair the barn, clear the house site." She sighed, the enormity of the task suddenly overwhelming. Owen nodded. "One step at a time, but we should keep watch tonight. I'll take first shift." Eliza wanted to argue that she could handle her own security, but exhaustion was settling into her bones. She'd barely slept since her father's murder. "Wake me in 4 hours." Owen agreed, and Eliza claimed one of the bunks, laying her rifle within easy reach. Despite her intention to remain alert, she fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. She dreamed of fire and screaming horses, of her father's voice calling her name. When she jolted awake, heart pounding, she found Owen sitting by the window, his profile illuminated by moonlight. "Bad dreams?" he asked softly. "How did you know?" You called out in your sleep. He glanced at her. "It's been less than 2 hours. Try to rest more." "I'm fine," she insisted, sitting up. "I'll take over." Owen didn't move. "Eliza, you need your strength. So do you." "I've gone longer without sleep." Something in his voice suggested he spoke from difficult experience. "Trust me on this." Trust. Such a simple word for such a complex concept. Eliza hesitated, then slowly lay back down. "Wake me if anything happens. You have my word." As she drifted back to sleep, Eliza wondered what circumstances had brought Owen Armstrong to her door just when she needed help most. Coincidence seemed too simple an explanation, but she was too tired to puzzle it out further. When morning came, she woke to the smell of coffee and found Owen already outside, filling the water trough for the horses. "You let me sleep through the night," she accused, joining him at the well. "You needed it more than I needed company." He handed her a cup of coffee. "We've got a busy day ahead." Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm. Each day they rode out at dawn, searching for scattered cattle, bringing them back to the gradually expanding herd. They repaired fences, cleared debris, and began laying the foundation for a new barn. Owen proved to be as capable as he'd claimed, skilled with horses, knowledgeable about cattle, and seemingly tireless when it came to hard labor. More importantly, he treated Eliza as an equal, never questioning her decisions or suggesting she leave the difficult tasks to him. When she insisted on helping to lift heavy support beams for the barn, he simply showed her the most efficient way to position herself, rather than trying to take over. "Most men would have told me to step aside," she remarked one evening as they sat outside the bunkhouse, the desert air cooling rapidly with the setting sun. "Most men are intimidated by capable women." Owen was whittling a piece of wood, his knife moving with practiced precision. "I was raised by one. My mother ran our farm after my father died in the war. She plowed fields, repaired roofs, and kept food on the table for 5 children. She sounds remarkable," She was. A shadow crossed his face. Died of pneumonia 6 years ago. My brothers took over the farm, but I needed to find my own path. So you became a cowhand, he nodded. It suited me. I like the open country, the work, but I've never stayed in one place long. Why not? Owen was quiet for a moment, his knife pausing. Never found a reason compelling enough to put down roots, I guess. There was more to it than that, Eliza sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone had their secrets in this harsh land. What about you? He asked. Did you never consider leaving, finding an easier life? This is my home, she said simply. It's in my blood. My father used to say we didn't own this land so much as we belonged to it. Owen smiled. Wise man. He would have liked you. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she quickly looked away, surprising herself with the admission. They were interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Owen was on his feet immediately, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. Get inside, he said quietly. Like hell I will, Eliza replied, grabbing her rifle. This is my land. They positioned themselves behind the half-built barn wall, watching as 3 riders approached. Even in the fading light, Eliza recognized the lead rider. George Whitman, she muttered, and 2 of his father's hired guns. Owen's expression hardened. What do you want to do? Hear what they have to say, then tell them to get off my property. The riders stopped about 30 yards from the bunkhouse. George Whitman was a thick-set man in his mid-30s, with a florid face and small, mean eyes. He dressed like he thought a gentleman should, but the expensive clothes couldn't hide the cruelty in his bearing. O'Malley, he called out, I know you're here. We need to talk business. Eliza stepped out from behind the barn wall, rifle held ready but not aimed. Owen followed, positioning himself slightly behind and to her right. There's no business between us, Whitman, she called back. Except the matter of your father murdering mine. George's face darkened. That's a dangerous accusation, girl. My father was defending himself. Against an unarmed man. Eliza's voice was cold. Get off my land. Whitman noticed Owen for the first time. Hired yourself some protection, I see. Didn't take you for the type to hide behind a man's gun. I don't hide behind anyone, Eliza replied evenly. Mr. Armstrong works for me. Now state your business or leave. Whitman exchanged glances with his companions before continuing. I've come to make you a final offer. $1,000 for this land. That's generous, considering the state it's in. It's worth 10 times that, and you know it. It's worth what someone's willing to pay. Whitman smiled unpleasantly. And no one else is buying. I'm not selling. Whitman's smile vanished. Don't be foolish, girl. You can't run a ranch. You're just postponing the inevitable. Maybe she can't. Owen spoke up, his voice calm but carrying clearly across the distance between them. But we can. Whitman's eyes narrowed. You'd best stay out of matters that don't concern you, stranger. I'm employed here, Owen replied. That makes it my concern. For a tense moment, Whitman seemed to be considering his options. Finally, he yanked his horse's reins, turning the animal sharply. This isn't over, O'Malley, he called over his shoulder. Not by a long shot. They watched in silence as the 3 riders disappeared into the gathering dusk. He'll be back, Owen said quietly, with more men next time. Eliza lowered her rifle. We need to be ready. Owen turned to look at her, his expression serious. We will be. That night, as they discussed strategies for defending the ranch, something shifted between them. The shared danger had created a bond that transcended their employer-employee relationship. Eliza found herself noticing the way the lamplight caught in Owen's eyes, how his hands moved as he talked, strong and sure. For his part, Owen seemed increasingly protective, though never in a way that undermined her authority or capability. He treated her as a partner rather than someone to be sheltered, and that respect meant more to Eliza than she cared to admit. 2 days later, they rode into town for supplies. Eliza had been avoiding Tucson, knowing the reception she would receive, but they needed tools and provisions that couldn't be procured elsewhere. As expected, their arrival drew stares and whispers. Eliza kept her head high as they tied their horses outside the general store, ignoring the curious gazes that followed them. Inside, Mr. Jenkins, the store owner, greeted them with obvious discomfort. "Miss O'Malley, didn't expect to see you back so soon. Just need supplies, Mr. Jenkins." She handed him a list. "And information, if you have it." "Information." Jenkins glanced nervously toward the door. "About Whitman's movements. I know he's been talking to the other ranchers." Jenkins busied himself gathering items from her list. "I don't get involved in such matters, Miss O'Malley." Owen stepped forward. "Mr. Jenkins, we understand your position, but Eliza's father was murdered and justice hasn't been served. Surely you can appreciate her situation." Jenkins hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Whitman's been bringing in men from up north, rough sorts. Word is he's planning something big." Eliza exchanged a glance with Owen. "When? Can't say for certain." Jenkins wrapped a package of coffee, but soon. He's not a patient man. They paid for their supplies and stepped back onto the boardwalk where they found Sheriff Perkins waiting for them. "Miss O'Malley," he nodded, his expression grim. "Mr. Armstrong, I'd like a word." "What about Sheriff?" Eliza asked cautiously. "Not here." He gestured toward his office across the street. "Please." They followed him, both alert for any sign of trouble. Inside the sheriff's office, Perkins closed the door and pulled the blind. "You're stirring up a hornet's nest staying out there," he said without preamble. "Whitman's furious. Says you're trespassing." "It's my land," Eliza replied sharply. "According to the bank, it may not be for long." Perkins sighed. "Your father took out a loan last year, payments coming due, and Whitman's pressuring the bank to call it in early." Eliza felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. "That's not possible. My father never mentioned a loan." "It was for breeding stock," Perkins explained. "He was going to tell you when they arrived, make it a surprise, but then Whitman killed him," she finished flatly. "How much?" $500. Due in 2 weeks. Owen stepped forward. "That's convenient timing for Whitman, isn't it just?" Perkins didn't look happy about it. "Look, I don't like how this is playing out any more than you do. Richard O'Malley was a good man, but my hands are tied. If you don't make that payment, Whitman can legally claim the land." "We'll make it," Eliza said firmly, though her mind was racing. They had perhaps 20 head of cattle ready for market, not nearly enough to raise that sum in 2 weeks. Outside the sheriff's office, Owen took her arm, guiding her toward a quiet side street. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice low and intense. "There must be a way to raise that money." Eliza leaned against the wall of the building, momentarily overwhelmed. "We could sell all the cattle we have and still come up short." "What about the money your father hid? You mentioned it when I first arrived." $200. Not enough." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "But there might be another way, the horse auction in Benson next week. If we could break some of the wild mustangs on the North Range." Owen nodded slowly. "Good mustangs can bring $50 each. If we could break and train 5 or 6. "It's dangerous work," Eliza warned. "Those horses have never been handled." "Fortunately," Owen said with a hint of a smile, "you happen to have hired someone who's broken mustangs before." They worked from sunup to sundown for the next 5 days, trapping wild horses in a makeshift corral and beginning the arduous process of breaking them to saddle. Owen's expertise proved invaluable. He had a way with the wild animals that bordered on magical. Speaking to them in low, soothing tones as he introduced them to human contact. Eliza was no novice herself, having helped her father with similar work in the past. Together, they managed to get 8 promising Mustangs penned and started on basic training. It was exhausting, often painful work, but with each small success, hope grew. On the 4th evening, as they were rubbing liniment into bruised muscles by the fire, Owen suddenly chuckled. "What?" Eliza asked, looking up from her arm where a spirited buckskin had left an impressive bruise. "Just thinking about what Whitman would say if he could see you now. Half the men I've known wouldn't have lasted 2 days doing what you've been doing." "Yet another reason they're not here and I am," she replied, but there was warmth in her voice. Owen's expression turned serious. "You know, when I first saw you in town that day, loading your wagon while those fools mocked you, I thought to myself, there's a woman who knows her own worth." Eliza felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "Is that why you offered to help?" "Out of admiration, partly," he admitted, "but also because I recognized something in you, a determination to stand your ground no matter the cost. My mother had that same quality." "High praise indeed, comparing me to her. She would have liked you." He hesitated, then added softly, "I like you, Eliza O'Malley, more than is probably wise given the circumstances." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Eliza found herself at a loss for words, caught between the surge of answering feeling in her chest and the practical knowledge that this was no time for such complications. "Owen," she began, uncertain what would follow. A distant crash saved her from having to continue. They both jumped to their feet, reaching for weapons. "The Mustang corral," Owen said, already moving toward the door. They ran through the darkness, guided by moonlight and the sounds of frightened horses. As they approached the corral, Eliza could make out shadowy figures moving among the panicked animals. "Whitman's men," she hissed, raising her rifle. Owen put a hand on the barrel, lowering it gently. "We're outnumbered. Let's see what they're doing first." They crept closer, using the broken terrain for cover. 4 men were systematically driving the Mustangs out of the corral, where a damaged section of fence had been pulled down. "They're scattering our horses," Eliza whispered furiously. "Without them, we can't raise the money." Owen's face was grim in the moonlight. "We can't let them finish." "I'll circle around to the north," Eliza decided. "When I fire a shot, you move in from here. The confusion should give us an advantage." He looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. "Be careful." Eliza moved quickly through the darkness, using skills honed over years of hunting in these same hills. She positioned herself behind a large boulder overlooking the corral, took careful aim at the sky, and fired. The sharp crack of her rifle shattered the night. As expected, the men below froze momentarily in surprise, then scattered for cover. In the same instant, Owen emerged from the south, firing 2 quick shots that kicked up dust at the feet of the nearest rustler. "That's far enough," Eliza shouted. "Next bullet finds flesh." One of the men fired blindly in her direction, the shot going wide. Owen's return fire was more precise, clipping the man's hat from his head. "Tell Whitman this won't work," Owen called out, his voice carrying easily in the night air. "Miss O'Malley isn't leaving." There was a hurried conference among the men. Then one of them shouted back, "This ain't over," before they retreated to where their horses were hidden. Eliza and Owen maintained their positions until they were certain the men were gone, then met at the damaged corral fence. "We lost 3 of the best ones," Eliza said, surveying the empty corral. 5 Mustangs remained, huddled nervously in the far corner. "We can track them at first light," Owen suggested, though they both knew the chances of finding specific horses in the vast desert were slim. "No time." Eliza began examining the broken fence. "We need to secure what we have left and continue training. The auction is in 3 days." They worked through the night, repairing the fence and calming the remaining horses. When dawn broke, they were exhausted but determined. 5 Mustangs might still bring enough if they could complete their training in time. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. They took turns sleeping in short shifts, never leaving the Mustangs unguarded. By the time they loaded the animals into a borrowed stock wagon for the journey to Benson, all 5 were saddle broken and responding to basic commands. The auction itself was a tense affair. Eliza stood with the horses while Owen worked the crowd, talking up the animals' quality to potential buyers. When the bidding started, Eliza held her breath, mentally calculating after each sale. The first 3 Mustangs sold well $60 for the gray gelding, $55 for the bay mare, and $65 for the handsome roan. But the fourth, a skittish sorrel, brought only $40 when the bidding stalled. As the final horse, a sturdy black gelding, was led into the ring, Eliza did the math in her head. They needed at least $70 to reach their goal. The bidding started slow but picked up when the black displayed his smooth gait. 60, 65, 70. Eliza gripped Owen's arm as the price climbed. When the hammer finally fell at $85, she nearly collapsed with relief. "We did it," she whispered, tears threatening for the first time since her father's death. "We actually did it." Owen's arm went around her shoulders, a brief, supportive embrace. "You did it, Eliza. Those horses responded to you in a way I've rarely seen." They collected their money and began the journey back to the ranch, both exhausted but buoyed by their success. They'd make the loan payment with a small amount to spare enough to begin truly rebuilding. But as they approached the O'Malley ranch late the next day, they knew immediately that something was wrong. Smoke rose from where the bunkhouse stood, and the newly repaired corral fence was once again broken down. "No," Eliza breathed, urging her horse to a gallop. They found the bunkhouse still standing but badly damaged by fire. The remaining cattle had been scattered, and someone had dumped their supplies in the well, contaminating their water source. "Whitman," Eliza said, her voice shaking with rage as she surveyed the destruction. "He knew we'd be gone for the auction." Owen was examining tracks in the dirt. "At least 6 men, maybe more. They were thorough." Eliza slammed her fist against a charred post. "Even with the loan payment, we can't rebuild from this, not in time to establish a working ranch before winter." "We're not beaten yet." Owen straightened, his expression resolute. "We have the money, we have each other. That's more than most people start with." "It's not enough." For the first time since he'd met her, Eliza's composure cracked. "Don't you see? Whitman won't stop. Even if we rebuild again, he'll just destroy it. He has too many men, too much influence." "Then we fight back," Owen said simply. "Not just with physical strength, but with the law on our side." "The law?" Eliza laughed bitterly. "The law that lets a murderer walk free. The law that would rather see a woman destitute than successful. The law that says arson is a crime. The law that says loan fraud is punishable." Owen took her by the shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me, Eliza. I didn't tell you everything about my past. Before I started riding the trails, I worked for a circuit judge in Texas. I know enough about the law to understand that what Whitman is doing isn't just immoral, it's illegal." She stared at him. "Why didn't you say anything before?" "Because proving it requires evidence." His eyes were intense. "And now we have some. The timing of the loan being called in. The convenient destruction of your property when we were away. The witnesses in Benson who saw us there, proving we couldn't have caused this damage ourselves. It's still our word against his," Eliza pointed out, though hope was beginning to stir. And he has powerful friends. So do I. Owen released her shoulders. I haven't called on them in years, but I think it's time. That evening, as they made camp a safe distance from the damaged bunkhouse, Owen explained his plan. He had connections to a federal marshal who specialized in land fraud cases, a man he'd worked with during his time with the circuit court. If they could get word to him, with enough evidence to warrant an investigation, Whitman's entire operation might come under scrutiny. It's a gamble, he admitted, and it will take time, but it's our best chance for lasting justice. Eliza considered the proposal as she stared into the small campfire. Even if it works, what do we do in the meantime? We can't stay here. It's too dangerous now that Whitman's shown how far he'll go. We go to Tucson, make the loan payment, and then find somewhere safe to wait. Owen hesitated. I have some savings. Not much, but enough to get us by for a while. Us? Eliza looked up sharply. Owen, this isn't your fight. You've already done more than I had any right to expect. It became my fight the moment I decided to help you. His voice was quiet but firm. I'm not leaving, Eliza, not unless you tell me to go. The firelight illuminated his face, casting shadows that emphasized the determination in his expression. In that moment, Eliza realized how much she had come to depend on him, not just for physical help, but for the unwavering belief he had in her, in them as a team. I don't want you to go, she admitted softly, but I won't have you risking your life for my land. It's not about the land. Owen met her gaze steadily. It hasn't been for some time now. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Eliza felt her heart quicken, aware that they were approaching a threshold that, once crossed, would change everything. What is it about then? She asked, barely above a whisper. Owen moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. It's about the woman who refuses to be beaten, who works harder than any man I've known, who faces each new challenge with courage and determination. His hand found hers in the firelight. It's about you, Eliza O'Malley. She didn't pull away from his touch. I'm not what most men want in a woman. I'm not most men. A smile touched his lips. And thank God you're not what most men want. You're so much more. The distance between them seemed to vanish as he leaned forward, his free hand gently cupping her cheek. When his lips met hers, the contact was soft, questioning. Eliza hesitated only a moment before responding, her hand rising to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, carrying with it all the tension and emotion of the past weeks. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Eliza found herself smiling despite the destruction surrounding them, despite the uncertainty of their future. Well, she said, attempting to regain her composure, that certainly complicates things. Owen laughed, the sound warm in the desert night. Life's rarely simple in my experience, but it's better with the right company. They spent the night planning their next move, acutely aware of the new dimension to their relationship, but focused on the practical matters at hand. By dawn, they had a strategy. They would go to Tucson, pay the loan, then travel to Prescott, where Owen's former colleague now served as a territorial judge. With his help, they would build a case against Whitman. In Tucson, they faced predictable resistance from the bank manager, who seemed disappointed that they had the funds for the loan payment. After receiving their receipt, which Owen insisted on and carefully examined for any irregularities, they visited Sheriff Perkins to officially report the destruction at the ranch. Can't say I'm surprised, Perkins sighed after recording their statement. Whitman's been strutting around town like he already owns your place, Miss O'Malley. Well, he doesn't, Eliza replied firmly, and we intend to make sure he's held accountable for his actions. Perkins looked uncomfortable. I'd be careful making those accusations public. Whitman's not a man to cross lightly. Neither am I, Eliza retorted. My father taught me to stand my ground. Your father is dead, Perkins pointed out bluntly, and his murderer will face justice, Owen interjected, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable edge. One way or another. They left Tucson that afternoon, taking a roundabout route to avoid potential ambush. The journey to Prescott would take several days, across terrain that offered both dangers and advantages. Owen knew the country well, having ridden it many times, and Eliza's knowledge of local water sources proved invaluable. They traveled light and cautiously, aware that Whitman might have sent men after them once he realized they had made the loan payment. Each night, they took turns standing watch, though the relative safety of their hidden campsites allowed for moments of quieter connection. On their second evening on the trail, as they sat beside a small, screened fire in a sheltered arroyo, Owen shared more about his past. He had been a promising law student in St. Louis before family obligations called him home to Texas. After his mother's death, he had worked briefly with the circuit court before restlessness drove him to the Cowboy's life. I never felt settled anywhere, he explained, poking at the fire with a stick, always looking for something I couldn't name. And now, Eliza asked softly. He looked up, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Now I think I've found it. The simple declaration warmed her more than the fire. Eliza had never considered herself the romantic type. Practical survival had always taken precedence over such luxuries. But with Owen, she was discovering parts of herself long suppressed. Vulnerability, tenderness, the capacity for joy even in difficult circumstances. I never thought I'd say this, she admitted, but I'm almost grateful to Whitman. If he hadn't burned my ranch, I might never have met you. Owen's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's a remarkably optimistic view considering everything that's happened. She shrugged. My mother used to say that God never closes a door without opening a window. I didn't always believe her, especially after she died. But maybe she was right. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand. Whatever window opened, I'm glad it led me to you. Their fourth day on the trail brought them to a small trading post where they could replenish supplies and perhaps gain information. As Owen negotiated for coffee and ammunition, Eliza overheard a conversation between two freighters that made her blood run cold. Heard there's a reward for information on a woman and man traveling north from Tucson, one was saying. $500, offered by George Whitman himself. What they do? Asked his companion. Stole from him, supposedly. Woman's described as tall, red-haired. Man's a cowhand, brown hair, blue eyes. Eliza casually moved away, returning to Owen's side with a warning murmur. They paid for their supplies and left as inconspicuously as possible, changing their planned route once out of sight of the trading post. He's serious about stopping us, Eliza said grimly as they made camp that night in a hidden canyon. $500 would tempt a lot of people. It means he's worried, Owen pointed out. He wouldn't go to such lengths if he didn't fear what we might do, or he's just vindictive. That too. Owen checked his revolver, a habit that had become more frequent since leaving Tucson. We're only 2 days from Prescott. Once we reach Judge Harmon, we'll have protection. Eliza wasn't so sure, but she kept her doubts to herself. They had come too far to turn back now. The next morning, as they prepared to leave their campsite, Owen suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his holster. Riders, he said quietly. At least 3 coming fast. Eliza immediately began gathering their belongings. Bounty hunters or Whitman's men. Either way, we need to move. He quickly saddled their horses. There's a narrow pass about 2 miles north. If we can reach it, they'll have to come at us single file. They mounted and rode hard, keeping to rocky ground where possible to obscure their tracks. But their pursuers were skilled trackers, and the gap between them gradually narrowed. As they approached the pass Owen had mentioned, the sound of gunfire erupted behind them, bullets whining overhead. "Keep going," Owen shouted, turning in his saddle to return fire. "I'll hold them off." "Like hell you will." Eliza drew her own revolver, wheeling her horse around. "We stand together or not at all." For a split second, their eyes met his, filled with fear for her safety, hers with uncompromising determination. Then, with a curt nod, Owen positioned his horse alongside hers, both of them taking shelter behind a large boulder at the mouth of the pass. The pursuing riders, 4 in all, pulled up short when they realized their quarry had taken defensive positions. One of them, a heavy-set man with a drooping mustache, called out, "Might as well give yourselves up. Whitman's offering dead or alive. You'll find dead is considerably harder to collect." Owen shouted back, punctuating his point with a well-aimed shot that sent the spokesman's hat flying. A furious exchange of gunfire followed. Eliza proved herself an excellent shot, winging one of the bounty hunters in the shoulder and forcing him to retreat. Owen's marksmanship was equally impressive, his bullets consistently finding their marks. But they were outnumbered, and their ammunition was limited. As the firefight dragged on, Eliza realized they were being gradually pinned down, their options diminishing with each passing minute. "We need to make a break for it," she said during a lull in the shooting. "Through the pass. It's our only chance." Owen nodded grimly. "I'll cover you. When I give the signal, ride like hell and don't look back." "We go together," Eliza insisted. "I'm not leaving you behind." Before Owen could argue, the distinct sound of a rifle shot echoed through the canyon, but from behind them, from the direction of the pass. One of the bounty hunters cried out in pain. "What the?" Owen peered cautiously around the boulder. A voice called from the pass. "O'Malley, Armstrong. Fall back to me." They exchanged a bewildered glance, then, making a split-second decision, mounted their horses and galloped toward the pass. As they rounded the first bend, they found Sheriff Perkins and 2 deputies, rifles at the ready. "Thought you might need some assistance," Perkins said dryly as they dismounted beside him. "Seems I was right." "How did you find us?" Eliza asked, breathless from the chase, followed the bounty hunters. Perkins nodded toward the mouth of the pass where his deputies were keeping watch. "Been tracking Whitman's activities for months, gathering evidence. When I heard about the reward he'd posted for you two, I figured it was time to intervene." Owen's eyes narrowed. "You knew what he was doing all along," suspected, Perkins corrected. "Knowing and proving are different things." "But I've been working with the federal marshal's office. They're very interested in Mr. Whitman's business practices." "The same marshal Owen was planning to contact in Prescott?" Eliza asked. Perkins glanced at Owen with newfound respect. "Judge Harmon sent him. Seems Mr. Armstrong here has friends in high places." The bounty hunters, realizing they were now outnumbered and outgunned, retreated after a brief standoff. Perkins explained that a federal investigation into Whitman's activities was already underway, accelerated by the evidence they had gathered about the destruction of the O'Malley ranch. "He's been squeezing out smaller ranchers for years," Perkins said as they made camp that evening. "But he got careless with your place, Miss O'Malley. Too personal, too obvious. And when he posted that reward, claiming you'd stolen from him when you'd legally paid your loan, well, that was the final piece we needed." "What happens now?" Eliza asked, still processing this unexpected turn of events. "Now we escort you safely to Prescott, where you'll give your statements to the federal authorities." Perkins looked grim but satisfied. And then Whitman and his associates will face justice for fraud, destruction of property, and in your father's case, murder. Will it be enough? Owen asked, the question that had been weighing on both their minds. Whitman has powerful friends. Had powerful friends, Perkins corrected. Amazing how quickly rats desert a sinking ship. Once word of the federal investigation leaked, his business partners started distancing themselves. Nobody wants to be associated with a man facing charges of this magnitude. The revelation that justice might finally be within reach left Eliza momentarily speechless. After weeks of fighting what had seemed like an impossible battle, the sudden shift in their fortunes was almost too much to comprehend. "My father," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "He'll have justice." "Yes, madam, he will," Perkins nodded solemnly, "and you'll have your land back, legal and clear." That night, as they camped under the stars with Perkins and his deputies providing security, Owen and Eliza found a moment of privacy by a small stream that ran through the canyon. "I can hardly believe it," Eliza said, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "After everything, to think that we might actually win." "You never gave up," Owen said softly, "even when it seemed hopeless. That's what I admire most about you, Eliza. Your strength isn't just physical, it's here." He touched her heart lightly. She covered his hand with her own. "I couldn't have done it without you. Not just your help with the ranch, but your belief in me. No one's ever looked at me the way you do. And how's that? Like I'm not just enough, but more than enough. Like my strength is something to be valued, not hidden." Owen's expression grew serious. "When this is over, when Whitman is facing justice and your land is secure, what then?" The question held layers of meaning, and Eliza knew he wasn't just asking about the ranch. "I rebuild, plant crops, raise cattle, make the land thrive the way my father always dreamed it would. Alone." She met his gaze steadily. "That depends on you, Owen Armstrong. I've grown rather accustomed to your company." A slow smile spread across his face. "Is that an invitation to stay?" "It's more than that." Eliza took a deep breath, summoning courage of a different kind than she'd needed for their physical battles. "It's an invitation to build something together, if you want that." Owen's answer came not in words but in action, as he drew her into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes. When they finally parted, his eyes shone with emotion in the moonlight. "I've been a drifter most of my adult life," he said. "Never found a place that felt like home." "But home isn't just a place, is it? It's a person. And I found that with you, Eliza O'Malley." Their journey to Prescott the next day was uneventful, the bounty hunters apparently having decided that their quarry wasn't worth the risk of confronting a sheriff and his deputies. Upon reaching the territorial capital, they were immediately taken to meet with Judge Harmon and the federal marshal, a stern-faced man named Taggart, who listened intently as they recounted their experiences. "We've been building a case against Whitman for over a year," Taggart explained when they had finished. "Land fraud, intimidation, suspected murder, but witnesses have a way of disappearing or changing their stories when Whitman's involved. Your testimony, combined with the physical evidence from your ranch and Sheriff Perkins's observations, gives us what we need to move forward." Over the next 2 weeks, Eliza and Owen remained in Prescott, assisting the federal authorities as they prepared their case. News arrived that George Whitman and his father had been arrested, along with several of their associates. The bank manager in Tucson was also taken into custody, charged with conspiracy in the fraudulent loan scheme. When they finally returned to the O'Malley Ranch, escorted by Marshal Taggart and a contingent of deputies as a precaution, Eliza was both heartbroken and hopeful. The destruction was still evident everywhere she looked, but for the first time she could see beyond it to the possibilities that lay ahead. "It will take months to rebuild," she said as they stood surveying the damage. "Maybe longer." "We have time," Owen replied, his arm around her shoulders. "And help." He nodded toward the road, where several wagons were approaching. To Eliza's astonishment, she recognized the drivers as neighboring ranchers' men who had kept their distance when Whitman's influence was at its height, but who had always respected her father. "Word got around about what happened," Marshal Taggart explained with a satisfied smile. "Seems folks are eager to help now that Whitman's grip is broken." The months that followed were filled with hard work, as they gradually restored the O'Malley ranch to working order. With the help of neighbors and hired hands, they rebuilt the main house, repaired the barn and corrals, and began the process of re-establishing their herd. The federal case against the Whitmans proceeded, with both men eventually convicted of multiple charges. The elder Whitman, found guilty of Richard O'Malley's murder, was sentenced to hang, while his son received 20 years for fraud and conspiracy. Through it all, Owen remained at Eliza's side, their partnership evolving naturally from professional to personal. They were married the following spring in the newly completed ranch house, with Sheriff Perkins, Judge Harmon, and many of the neighbors who had helped them rebuild in attendance. "I never thought I'd find this," Eliza confessed to Owen as they stood on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "Not just the ranch restored, but this, us." "Your father would be proud," Owen said, his arms encircling her waist from behind. "Not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you are, the woman who refused to be beaten." She turned in his embrace to face him. "There was a moment that night when we found the bunkhouse burned when I almost gave up. Do you remember what you said to me?" Owen smiled. "I believe I said something about us having each other, and that being more than most people start with. You were right." Eliza reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that sun and wind had etched around his eyes. "Everything else can be rebuilt, replaced. But finding someone who sees your strength as an asset rather than a liability, that's rare. Not everyone is smart enough to recognize the value of a strong woman," Owen replied, his voice warm with affection. "Their loss, my gain." As twilight deepened around them, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of grief and seeming defeat, they had forged something beautiful and enduring, a partnership based on mutual respect and admiration, where strength was celebrated rather than diminished. In the years that followed, the O'Malley Armstrong Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the territory. They were known not just for the quality of their cattle, but for their fair treatment of workers and their willingness to help neighboring ranchers in times of need. Their family grew with the birth of 2 sons and a daughter, all of whom inherited their parents' determination and sense of justice. Eliza made sure her daughters learned to ride and rope alongside their brothers, while Owen taught all the children about the law and the importance of standing up for what was right. On warm summer evenings, they often sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching their children play in the yard that had once been ashes and rubble. On one such evening, as their 10th anniversary approached, Owen turned to his wife with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out if we hadn't met that day in Tucson?" Eliza considered the question, her gaze moving from their children to the thriving ranch around them. "Sometimes. But then I remember what my mother used to say about doors closing and windows opening." Owen smiled, taking her hand in his. "I'm glad you had the courage to climb through that window." "With you beside me," she replied, leaning against his shoulder as the desert stars began to appear overhead. "Always with you beside me." In a land that demanded strength and resilience, they had found not just survival but prosperity and happiness. And if the people of Tucson sometimes told the story of the woman whose strength had once been questioned because of her gender, they now did so with admiration rather than derision. "You're stronger than any man I know," Owen had told her once, in the darkest days of their struggle. And in the decades of partnership that followed, as they built a legacy of fairness and determination in the Arizona Territory, he never had cause to revise that assessment. Together, they had proven that true strength lay not in conforming to others' expectations, but in having the courage to forge one's own path, and in finding someone who valued that journey enough to share it.